I think it was 4 years ago, Jill, that we went to San Francisco. Was it four years ago or so? We took a family vacation to San Francisco. Have you ever been to San Francisco? It's a lovely town. I'd never been there before. And two of our daughters and our son-in-law lived there, and so Jill and I and Forrest and Leah all went to visit them, and we had the most marvelous time. It was amazing. You know, the Fisherman's Wharf was cool, and the pier was cool, and we saw all kinds of, they're not dolphins, what were those, they weren't walruses, I don't know what they were. Some kind of an animal that lives in the sea was hanging around there, and it was really cool. But the thing I remember most about that week was our visit to this amazing restaurant called Bodine's. Its full name is actually Bodine's Bakery, home of the original San Francisco sourdough bread. Have you been there? Anybody ever been there? It's amazing. There's like 8 of them up and down the coast or whatever, but it started in San Francisco. Now, it was summer, the height of the tourist season, and we went to Bodine's that day for lunch. And it was crowded, super crowded. You know what I'm talking about? Like, it took a long time to be seated, and we were starving. So, when we finally get to our table, and the waitress comes over, she does this marvelous thing. She leaves us a container of their sourdough bread and fresh butter, while she goes off to put in our drink orders. And I am telling you that we demolished that bread, right? So when she comes back, we asked for some more. You know, she was passing by. Could we get another bowl of bread? And she said, sure. And like I said, it was a really busy time in a really popular restaurant, so it took a long time to get our food. And so we just kept eating this free bread slathered in the delicious butter until it got embarrassing. After the third basket, we started blaming it on Leah. We said, we're like, we don't know why she's so picky today, but could you bring us some more? As, you know, our faces are all got butter all over them and everything. But could you, 5 baskets in all. Remember, Jill? It was awkward, but it was delicious. So, I guess what I want to start with this morning is, what's not to love about bread? Do you love bread as much as I love bread? Anybody here ever try to give up carbs? Right? Right? What's the first thing you have to give up on a low-carb diet? Bread! Isn't that horrible? That is just so cruel. Because bread is amazing, I think. Yeah? Which is why I'm so happy that Jesus talked about himself and about God in this way. I think it's inspired. The bread of life. I want some. Don't you? I'm in. Avocado of life? No, I'm not that interested. Squid of life? No, thank you. But bread of life? Yes, please. I do want some bread of life. So, that's what Jesus calls himself today. The bread of life. The Jewish people who were following Jesus in this time asked him to give them a sign that he was the prophet. Something like Moses had given to their ancestors. Do you remember what Moses had given their ancestors as they were wandering the desert? Yes? Manna, right? Which was a flaky and tasteless bread-like thing that sustained them during their 40 years as they're wandering in the desert. And they say, if you're really from God, then send us a sign like this. And Jesus said to them, well, listen, Moses gave you this bread thing, manna, but God is now offering you the true bread that comes from heaven. And then he said this, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry. Which totally freaked them out. Because they said, wait a minute. Hang on just a minute. They said, we know you. You grew up around here. We know your parents. We know exactly who you are, Mr. Jesus. And isn't that just the way we all deal with Jesus ourselves? We all love the Jesus that we know. The one that fits our view of him, or our view of ourselves, or who we want to be, or who we want him to be. Here's what we do all the time. We project our image of who we want God to be onto the God who really is. And we can't understand when they are different, or how such a thing could happen. If you don't believe me, just look around and ask yourselves how good we are at handling challenges to the Jesus that we have created for ourselves, our known Jesus. How good are we at handling challenges to that? Sometimes I think we wouldn't know Jesus if he walked up and smacked us in the head. I don't know if he ever would walk up and smack us in the head. He might me, never, he probably wouldn't you, but would you know Jesus if he came up to you? Or would you say, I know you, you're not Jesus? So the first thing that Jesus does, the thing that Jesus is always doing, is he confounds our ideas of who he is and who God is. And if you feel confused about why that is, I just say welcome to the club, because I think confused might just be the way we're supposed to feel. When we start to feel settled, I say look out. Because God is never, seems to me, the God that we can know fully. For example, today's text takes the way that I usually view the incarnation. Does that word, you know that word, the incarnation? That's the idea that Jesus is God present among us. God came to live incarnate in Jesus. God in Christ. Today's text takes my view of that and turns it upside down. I usually think of us as getting a glimpse of God through the lens of Jesus. So we look through the lens of Jesus and we see a glimpse of God. But this text makes the startling claim that we can only rightly see Jesus through the lens of God. See, the Jews knew God. They had no problem with God at all. But they didn't really know Jesus, and that's what was so upsetting to them. Jesus kept saying to them, look at me through the lens then of God. See in me the teachings of God, the things of God, the person of God, and you will see me for who I really am, which is different than who you might think. And when you do that, you might even see God a little differently. Looking at Jesus through the lens of God, right? I did that wrong. Looking at Jesus through the lens of God allows us to let loose for a moment our obsession with the heavenly and the eternal. That's what we're obsessed with. Most of us care about Jesus really because we think that's how we get to heaven. Right? If we're just honest with each other, am I being honest? Most of us really come here saying, how do I get to heaven? Because I know that someday, I finally figured out at age 60, I'm not going to live forever. So how do I then get to heaven? Well, I got to come to Jesus. Most of us are focused or even obsessed with the heavenly and the eternal. What? Turn on your television. Turn to the channels that are so far up you don't normally, you're just trying to get somewhere else. And wait for someone to start yelling at you about who Jesus is. And what they'll be telling you is, you got to get to heaven. And there's only one way, and it's through Jesus. We're focused. And I'm not saying that's not important. But I'm saying if we look at Jesus through the lens of God, we can let loose for a moment of that obsession. And focus our attention on the immediate and the tangible. What is right before us. The God incarnate. The bread that Jesus gives us is a God that we can touch and feel and taste. It's like a heavenly takeout order. Viewing Jesus as God incorporates us not only into God's eternity, but also into Jesus' present reality, where justice serves as judgment and mercy trumps madness. And why do we so often miss this? I think it's because we aren't hungry enough to devour that bread of life that is offered to us. Now, if you think about bread at a meal, when it's served as an appetizer, how does it taste? Delicious. Am I right? When it comes to you before, and you're hungry, it comes to you at the table, you're like, yeah, give me some of that bread. Hey, pass the butter, right? When you're hungry, they bring it. It's amazing. Now, think about when it's served as a part of your entree, as a side, right? With the meal. Now it's okay, this piece of bread sitting there, but the main thing is the spaghetti or the steak, isn't it? Like the bread, okay, I'll have a bite now, but it's mostly about the entree. The bread is the garnish. Now, what if at the end of the meal, they bring over the dessert tray, and instead of death by chocolate, or carrot cake, or lemon pie, it's just different kinds of bread? What would you say? No thanks. I'm full. Right? I'm full, but I want something sweet. I want something exciting. I want something more, we would say, because we are so full. See the point? Do you? No, here it is. Let me give it to you. Here it is. The point is, most of the time, our lives are these huge meals of busyness and enjoyment and hobbies and pursuits that we have put together for ourselves. These great gourmet meals of life that we have cobbled together for ourselves. And if we are interested in spiritual bread at all, it is just as kind of a garnish to all that we have. And that's just not what God intends. Jesus says, if you are hungry enough, you will desire God with all your heart, and all your mind, and all your strength, and all your soul. When you get to that place, Jesus says, when you're good and ready, when you're seriously starving for the God of heaven and earth, have a taste of my bread then. And here's what he promises. Unlimited portions. Unbelievable flavor, undeniably good, unmistakably God. That is the bread that Jesus offers us. And he offers it with only one simple question. Are you hungry?